Today I am deeply honored to share with you a testimony that carries profound truth, genuine hope, and the potential to transform how you understand life, death, and eternity. This remarkable account comes directly from someone who experienced something so extraordinary, so life-changing, that it forever altered their entire understanding of what it means to be alive, what it means to die, and what awaits us all on the other side of this physical existence. This brave, courageous individual has graciously given me their permission to share their incredible story with all of you. But they've made one important request that I want to honor completely and respect fully. They've asked that I carefully protect their identity and privacy by changing the names and locations throughout this narrative. I want to be completely honest, transparent, and upfront with you from the very beginning about what has been changed and what remains exactly as it happened. While I have thoughtfully and carefully altered personal identifying details, like names of people and places, every single spiritual aspect, every divine encounter, every revelation received, every spiritual truth discovered, all of it is preserved precisely, exactly as this person experienced it firsthand. I haven't added even one word to the spiritual content, and I haven't taken anything away or diminished it in any way. Not one detail of their profound encounter with the divine has been modified, embellished, or altered in any way whatsoever. The purpose of sharing this powerful, life-changing testimony is to bring you closer to understanding the spiritual reality that exists all around us constantly, even when we cannot see it or perceive it with our limited physical senses. My deepest, most sincere prayer is that this testimony will speak directly to your heart, strengthen your faith in God and His eternal love for each of us, help you understand that death is not an ending to be feared, but rather a beautiful transition to something far more glorious than we can imagine, and remind you that we are all eternal spiritual beings, temporarily experiencing human life, created in the image of our loving Creator. May this story touch your soul deeply and bring you genuine peace, comfort, and hope about what awaits every one of us when our time in this physical world finally comes to an end. Michael Patterson had devoted the better part of his adult life, nearly 3 decades, to protecting and serving the people of northern New Mexico as a dedicated, committed firefighter and emergency medical paramedic. In 1994, he was working at Fire Station 6, which served the greater Albuquerque metropolitan area, and he approached his responsibilities and duties with complete dedication, unwavering commitment, and genuine passion for helping others. Michael wasn't the type of person who simply showed up to collect a paycheck and count down the hours until his shift ended. He genuinely, deeply cared about every single person he helped and encountered during emergency calls and responses. He treated each patient with the same profound care, respect, dignity, and compassion he would want for his own beloved family members or closest friends. He would make it a point to remember their names, their faces, their stories, and would often ask about them weeks or even months later when he saw family members around town. Sometimes he would even attend their funerals if they didn't make it, paying his respects and offering comfort to grieving families. His fellow firefighters and colleagues at the station respected and admired him tremendously, not just for his exceptional technical skill and extensive medical knowledge, but for his genuine compassion, his kind heart, his integrity, and his unwavering dedication to serving others selflessly. Outside of his professional life as a first responder, Michael was an avid, passionate runner and cyclist who loved pushing his physical limits. He had successfully completed numerous full marathons throughout the southwestern United States over the years, and had even tackled and finished several grueling, demanding Ironman triathlon competitions that tested every limit of human endurance and willpower. His body was in exceptional, remarkable physical condition, his heart and lungs operating with extraordinary efficiency, functioning like a finely tuned precision machine. But despite all of his physical fitness and strength, despite all of his extensive medical training and decades of hands-on experience, despite all of his knowledge and preparation, no amount of conditioning or expertise could have possibly prepared him for what was about to happen during that difficult, challenging winter season. A devastating, aggressive flu epidemic had swept across New Mexico and neighboring states that season, overwhelming hospitals, clinics, and medical facilities throughout the entire state. The Albuquerque metropolitan area was hit particularly hard, experiencing some of the highest infection and mortality rates in the region. Emergency rooms and urgent care centers were packed far beyond their designed capacity with severely, critically ill patients. People were dying from serious complications faster than the overwhelmed medical system could respond or provide adequate care. Healthcare workers throughout the region were absolutely exhausted, working grueling double and triple shifts, going days without adequate rest, trying desperately to manage the ongoing crisis. Michael and his crew at Station 6 were responding to medical emergency calls around the clock, continuously, without pause. Every 12-hour shift felt absolutely endless, like it would never end. Every ambulance run, every emergency transport meant encountering another person fighting desperately for their life, another terrified family standing by helplessly, paralyzed with fear as they watched their loved one struggle to breathe, struggle to survive. The entire regional emergency response system was stretched far beyond its normal breaking point, pushed to the absolute edge of complete collapse. One particular emergency call during that terrible, devastating flu season would change Michael's life forever, in ways he could never have anticipated or imagined. He and his regular partner were dispatched to respond to a small adobe house in the South Valley neighborhood of Albuquerque, a working-class area on the city's south side. When they arrived at the modest residence and were let inside by a frightened, worried neighbor who had called for help, they found a woman who had been confined to her small bedroom for what appeared to be several days. She had completely sealed herself in that dark, cramped room when she first got sick, and the symptoms hit her. All the curtains and blinds were drawn tight, blocking out every bit of natural light. The door had been kept closed. The air inside was oppressively hot, thick, stale, and difficult to breathe. The woman was in critical, life-threatening condition, barely breathing, her respirations shallow and rapid, her fever dangerously, frighteningly high. She had been far too weak and disoriented to call for help herself or even reach for the phone. A neighbor, an elderly woman who lived in the adjacent unit, had heard her weak moaning and crying through the thin shared wall and had immediately, without hesitation, called 911 for emergency assistance. Michael immediately, instinctively shifted into complete emergency response mode, his extensive training and years of experience taking over automatically. He quickly climbed onto the bed and carefully positioned himself strategically so he could properly and securely place an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth to deliver life-saving oxygen. He worked quickly, efficiently, and with practiced confidence, making absolutely sure the seal was tight and secure, so she would receive maximum oxygen flow to her starving lungs. But just as he leaned in closely to check and verify that the mask placement was correct and functioning properly, the woman suddenly coughed violently, a deep, rattling cough from her chest, and exhaled forcefully directly into his unprotected face. Michael inhaled at exactly that same unfortunate moment. He felt the warm, moist, contaminated breath rush straight down his throat directly into his lungs. As a highly trained, experienced paramedic with years of medical knowledge, he recognized immediately, with absolute certainty, what had just happened to him. He had received direct, completely unprotected exposure to whatever virulent, aggressive pathogen this critically ill woman was carrying in her respiratory system. But he firmly, deliberately pushed the worrying, troubling thought aside and remained completely, totally focused on his patient and her immediate, urgent needs. He got her condition stabilized as much as possible under the difficult circumstances, helped his partner carefully and gently load her onto their ambulance stretcher, and they transported her emergently with lights flashing and sirens blaring to the nearest hospital emergency department that still had capacity and resources to accept additional critical patients during the overwhelming crisis. Within less than 48 hours, just 2 short days later, Michael began experiencing symptoms that were more severe, more frightening, more intense than anything he had ever encountered or experienced in his entire life. The illness attacked his body with shocking, brutal speed and overwhelming intensity that terrified him. His body temperature spiked dangerously high, climbing rapidly to 105 degrees Fahrenheit and continuing to rise beyond that. Every single muscle and joint throughout his entire body ached with intense, grinding, unbearable pain that made even the slightest movement feel almost impossible. His head pounded relentlessly with such severe, crushing pressure that even the dimmest light or the quietest sound became absolutely unbearable torture to his hypersensitive nervous system. But what frightened and terrified him most deeply, what truly made him realize the life-threatening severity of his condition, was the rapid, relentless, uncontrollable dehydration that was literally draining his life away hour by hour. His body was violently rejecting absolutely everything he tried to consume. He couldn't keep down water, food, medication. Nothing at all would stay in his system for more than a few minutes. His digestive system was in complete, total rebellion and chaos, purging fluids rapidly and violently from every possible direction simultaneously. He could literally feel his body shutting down systematically, progressively, organ by organ, his strength evaporating and disappearing hour by hour as his vital organs began failing from acute, severe, life-threatening dehydration. On the third full day of this absolute nightmare, this living hell, Michael attempted with tremendous effort and determination to get himself out of his bed and stand up. His legs immediately buckled and collapsed underneath him as if they were made of rubber or water. He grabbed desperately, frantically onto the edge of the wooden dresser to prevent himself from falling completely to the floor in a heap, and somehow, using every last ounce of remaining strength he possessed, managed to stumble and half-crawl across the bedroom to the small bathroom. When he finally looked at his reflection in the mirror above the bathroom sink, what he saw staring back at him shocked him into a moment of absolute, terrifying clarity and recognition. He barely recognized himself. His face was skeletal in appearance, the skin pulled impossibly tight over his skull. His eyes were sunken deep into dark, hollow sockets that looked like empty caves in his skull. His skin had taken on a grayish, unhealthy pallor. He genuinely looked like death itself, like a corpse that was somehow still standing. Michael's extensive medical training and years of experience automatically kicked in and took over. He reached down with his trembling, shaking hands to check his radial pulse at his wrist, a fundamental, basic vital sign assessment that he had performed literally thousands upon thousands of times on patients throughout his long career in emergency medicine. He pressed his fingers firmly, deliberately against the inside of his wrist, searching desperately, hopefully for that familiar, reassuring rhythmic beating. Nothing. He couldn't detect anything at all, not even the faintest flutter. He pressed harder, applied more pressure, moved his fingers carefully to slightly different positions, tried his other wrist with equal determination. Still absolutely nothing whatsoever. He couldn't locate a pulse anywhere. His extensive medical knowledge and years of training immediately told him exactly what this critical sign meant. His blood pressure had dropped dangerously, catastrophically low, probably below 70 millimeters of mercury, possibly much lower. His heart was racing frantically at maybe 160 or even 170 beats per minute, working desperately to compensate. But his blood pressure was so critically low that the peripheral pulse in his wrists and extremities had completely vanished, disappeared entirely. Michael somehow, through sheer force of will, summoned enough remaining strength to get himself back from the bathroom to the bedroom. He called out weakly, desperately, his voice barely more than a hoarse whisper, to his family. His younger sister, who had been visiting and staying with them that week to help around the house, heard his weak voice and came running immediately into the bedroom. She took one quick look at Michael's critical condition, at his deathly appearance, and her face went completely pale with instant recognition and profound fear. She grabbed the telephone on the bedside table without any hesitation whatsoever and immediately dialed 911. Within just minutes, an Albuquerque Fire Department rescue unit arrived at the residence. Close colleagues and personal friends who had worked side by side with Michael for many years. When they entered the bedroom and saw the absolutely critical, dire condition he was in, several of them had visible tears forming and welling up in their eyes. They immediately, without any delay, established 2 large-bore intravenous lines in his arms and began running normal saline solution wide open, trying desperately to replace some of his catastrophic fluid loss. They loaded him carefully onto their stretcher and transported him code 3, full lights and sirens, maximum priority, to the University of New Mexico Hospital Emergency Department. approximately 20 to 25 minutes away through city traffic. When Michael arrived at the hospital's emergency department, the scene was one of barely controlled chaos and overwhelming activity. The large waiting room was completely packed with patients, many of them obviously gravely ill. Every single treatment room and examination bay was occupied. Patients on gurneys lined the hallways. Medical staff were literally running from room to room, their faces showing profound exhaustion from working impossible hours day after day. Michael was wheeled rapidly into a treatment bay, where an overwhelmed emergency physician, who looked like he hadn't slept in days, was trying frantically to manage far too many critically ill patients. The exhausted doctor had implemented a standard treatment protocol for all flu patients during the crisis: pain medication, usually a morphine-based drug, and anti-nausea medication. He was moving quickly from patient to patient, trying to keep as many people alive as possible. Michael remained in that crowded treatment bay for approximately 40 to 45 minutes. The intravenous fluids gradually began to take some effect and provide some relief. 3 complete bags of saline solution went in, and he started feeling marginally better. His heart rate began to decrease somewhat. The confusion clouding his mind started to clear just a bit. He managed with considerable effort to sit up on the gurney and told his wife, who had followed separately in their car, that he thought he might be stable enough to go home and recover there. They could manage oral rehydration at home, he reasoned hopefully, but the nurse who came to check on him explained patiently but firmly that hospital protocol during the epidemic required every flu patient to receive the standard medications before discharge. Absolutely no exceptions were being made. Michael, who had always deeply respected medical authority and protocols, agreed without argument. He trusted the system completely. He had been part of it for decades. What happened in the next few minutes would haunt his wife's nightmares for many years to come. The nurse carefully prepared 2 syringes at the medication station, one containing Nubain, which is a potent synthetic morphine, and another containing strong anti-nausea medication. Michael was sitting up on the edge of the gurney, actually beginning to stand, when the nurse approached and administered both medications directly into his IV line. She pushed them in quickly, efficiently, emptying both syringes in rapid succession, maybe 10 to 15 seconds total. Within moments, perhaps only 5 to 8 seconds at most, Michael's eyes suddenly rolled upward and backward in his head, until only the whites were visible. His wife later described it as one of the most terrifying things she had ever witnessed. It looked completely unnatural, nightmarish. Then his entire body went completely rigid, every muscle locked in spasm. He toppled straight backward onto the gurney, hitting it hard, completely unconscious before his head touched the pillow. Immediately, instantly, the treatment bay exploded with urgent activity. Medical personnel came running from every direction. They recognized what was happening, a severe adverse reaction to the medications, essentially an overdose. Someone grabbed Narcan from the crash cart and administered it intravenously. Narcan is the emergency reversal drug for opiates. It works by instantly blocking opiate receptors. They gave Michael 1 dose, then quickly followed with a 2nd dose. They started additional IV lines. They tilted the bed into Trendelenburg position, head down, feet elevated, to maximize blood flow to his brain. But despite all these interventions, Michael's condition kept deteriorating. His blood pressure had crashed catastrophically to 38/0. His heart was still beating, but it wasn't generating anywhere near enough pressure to circulate blood properly throughout his body. The trauma team made an immediate decision to transfer him to intensive care. They worked on him continuously throughout the entire night, adjusting medications, monitoring his vitals minute by minute, doing absolutely everything medically possible to keep him alive. When morning finally arrived, the ICU attending physician sat down with Michael's wife to explain what had happened. The morphine medication caused systemic vasodilation throughout his circulatory system. The doctor explained carefully. "Imagine your blood vessels as a network of tubes filled with fluid," he said. "Normally those tubes maintain a certain diameter, and there's enough blood volume to fill them and create pressure for circulation. But the medication caused all his blood vessels to dilate dramatically. Suddenly, the blood volume in his body, already depleted by days of severe dehydration, wasn't sufficient to fill the expanded vascular space. His blood pressure collapsed. The doctor said the only reason Michael probably survived was his exceptional cardiovascular fitness from years of endurance training. His system was efficient enough at delivering oxygen that even with critically low blood pressure, his organs received just barely enough to avoid complete failure. Michael never regained consciousness that night in any conventional medical sense. His body lay motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping monitors and humming machines. But sometime between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, when his physical form was hovering on the edge between life and death, something absolutely extraordinary happened. Michael left his body completely. The experience began with a sensation he would struggle to describe for the rest of his life. It felt like he had been trapped, imprisoned in a small, hot, suffocating space for as long as he could remember, and suddenly, instantly, miraculously, the walls simply dissolved and vanished. He was released into boundless, infinite freedom. The relief was so overwhelming, so complete and total, that it brought him immediately to a state of ecstatic joy beyond anything he had ever experienced. He found himself floating peacefully in a vast, limitless expanse, filled with enormous glowing spheres of different brilliant colors. These weren't stars as we see them in the night sky. They were conscious beings, living entities composed of pure light and divine energy, and they radiated such powerful, unconditional love that Michael felt embraced by the very heart of the universe itself. He understood immediately, instinctively, that these were what various spiritual traditions call light beings or angels, but experiencing them directly was nothing like reading descriptions. This was real, this was happening. This was infinitely more beautiful than anything he could have imagined. Michael himself no longer existed in physical form. He had become an expansive field of pure consciousness without any boundaries or limitations. The sensation was indescribably pleasurable, blissful beyond any comparison to physical pleasure. It was as if every particle of his consciousness was vibrating with pure joy. If he had to describe it using physical comparisons, he said it felt like warm honey or golden liquid light being poured into his consciousness and flowing through him, bringing everything alive with bliss and ecstasy. The pleasure was so intense, it made every good feeling he'd ever had in physical life seem pale by comparison. As he moved through this space, flying, floating, surrounded by these welcoming, loving beings, a profound realization struck him with tremendous force. How had he forgotten who he really was? How had he been so completely convinced that he was Michael Patterson, a paramedic from New Mexico, with all these problems and worries and concerns? Because being there in that space, he knew with absolute certainty that all of that was ultimately an illusion. His true identity was this vast, eternal consciousness, this boundless being of light. The human life was like a costume he had worn, a role he had played in a great drama, and he had gotten so absorbed in the performance that he had completely forgotten he was acting. The physical world, with all its drama and pain and struggle, was a temporary experience that came with being born into a material body. But this realm of infinite light and unconditional love, this was home. This was ultimate reality. This was who he truly was and had always been. After what felt like both an instant and an eternity, time didn't function normally there, Michael felt himself landing somewhere. He was standing on something solid. He looked around and saw he was inside some kind of facility or structure. It had walls that seemed to glow with their own soft light. There were tables positioned throughout the space and equipment of various kinds that he couldn't identify. The place felt purposeful, but also playful, like a workshop where joyful work was being done. And then he noticed them. 3 short beings standing directly in front of him, watching him with obvious delight. These 3 beings were unlike anything Michael had ever seen. They stood maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, with sturdy builds. They wore dark robes with hoods, but the hoods were pulled back so Michael could see their faces. They looked almost like gnomes or dwarves from fairy tales, with round, friendly faces and incredibly bright, sparkling eyes, and they were smiling. Huge, genuine smiles that radiated pure joy and love. Their eyes twinkled with playfulness and ancient wisdom. The 3 beings immediately started asking Michael questions in rapid succession, their voices musical and excited. "How was it down there?" one asked enthusiastically. "Tell us everything you experienced," another exclaimed. "What did you discover? What did you learn?" The third added. They were bouncing with enthusiasm, like excited children hearing about a friend's adventure. Michael stood there feeling disoriented. He had a strange sense that he should recognize these beings, that they were familiar, but his memory felt foggy. Then one of them turned to the others, gestured toward Michael, and said something that made all three burst into delighted laughter. "He doesn't remember us at all," the being announced cheerfully. They found this absolutely hilarious, laughing and nudging each other. Then Michael's attention was drawn to another being approaching from deeper within the structure. This being was completely different. Extraordinarily tall, perhaps 8 or 9 feet, and impossibly slender. He appeared to be made of luminous mist or vapor rather than solid matter. When he moved, it was mesmerizing to watch. Parts of his form would drift apart and flow back together, like watching someone move underwater. Despite his unusual appearance, he had a distinct face with the warmest, most radiant smile Michael had ever seen. His eyes were extraordinary, luminous and filled with such intense love that Michael could barely stand to look at them. When this tall being came close, something powerful happened. Michael felt his chest expand dramatically, as if his heart was growing too large for his body. At the same time, his throat tightened. A wave of overwhelming emotion crashed over him. He felt like he would burst into tears, not from sadness but from the sheer intensity of the pure love radiating from this being. It was love so complete, so unconditional and infinite, that Michael felt he might dissolve into it. It felt like standing in the presence of divine love itself. The three little beings kept giggling playfully amongst themselves. The tall being just stood there, radiating that overwhelming love, smiling gently. After several moments, Michael decided to move things forward. He looked up at the tall being and said, "Well, I'm obviously not going back there. So should we proceed with what's next? I've read about life reviews. Is that what we do now?" The tall being's response surprised Michael completely. He threw his head back and released a deep, rich, joyful laugh. When the laughter subsided, he looked at Michael with those loving eyes and said warmly, "Sure, absolutely. Let's do that. Where would you like to start?" The casualness of it stunned Michael. This didn't match the formal life review processes he'd read about. But the being's demeanor was so relaxed and non-judgmental that Michael went along with it. He began sharing some memories from his life, but nothing dramatic emerged. No terrible regrets or major sins. He mentioned one thing. Years ago, there had been an opportunity to take a ranger position in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. His wife had been excited about it. They would have spent a summer in the wilderness together, but Michael had chosen to stay with the fire department. Looking back, he wished he had taken that job. That was his only real regret. The tall being listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When Michael finished, the being smiled and said kindly, "All right, that's sufficient. It's time to return now." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. "Return?" he said in disbelief. "No way. I'm not going back. I'm finally home." But the tall being remained firm. "No," he said simply. "You have important work to complete. You're going back." Michael noticed the three beings had vanished. Now it was just him and the tall being. Michael made one final plea. "Please, the only people who will really miss me are my wife and my parents. They'll be sad, but they're strong. They'll get through it." The tall being found this touching but remained firm. "No, Michael, you're going back now." In that instant, everything began to dissolve. The space started fragmenting like a TV losing signal. Michael understood what was happening. He was being shifted to a different frequency. He realized that all reality operates on different frequencies, like radio stations. You can have completely different dimensions occupying the same space, just vibrating at different rates. He felt himself descending, dropping through layers of reality. The tall being faded away, and Michael fell into darkness. As he descended toward his body, he passed through a realm that terrified him. It was very close to our physical world, and it was a place of terrible loneliness and despair. It was gray, empty, cold. No love, no light, no hope. Michael felt it pulling at him, and he wanted nothing to do with it. It reminded him that not all non-physical realms are beautiful. Some are dark and frightening, and souls can become trapped there. Then suddenly, jarringly, he was back in his body. The sensation was uncomfortable, like being stuffed into a container too small. He remained unconscious for hours. When he began waking up, it happened gradually in stages. His first awareness was of beeping monitors. He opened his eyes briefly and saw machines around him. He focused on a blood pressure monitor. It showed 46/0. He stared at it, then passed out again. This pattern repeated. Brief moments of consciousness checking the monitor, seeing the numbers slowly climbing into the 70s and 80s, then back to darkness. Finally, a nurse entered and saw his eyes open. "You're awake!" she exclaimed with relief. Michael looked at her and said weakly, "I need to understand something. What am I doing back here? I was home. I was with friends I've known forever. How did I get back?" The nurse sat down beside his bed. She looked at him with compassion and said gently, "Sweetheart, you came incredibly close to death, but somehow you pulled through. Now you're back with us, and you're going to have to adjust to being alive again." Michael appreciated her kindness, but her words provided little comfort. For the next several days he felt deeply sad, not clinically depressed but mourning. He grieved for that other realm, that place of pure love and joy. He could feel the memory fading, which made it worse. He knew he might eventually doubt it had happened, so Michael started telling everyone about it. He told his colleagues at the station. He told friends and family. He told them all the same essential message. Death is nothing to fear. We've got it completely backwards. It's an upgrade instantly. It's wonderful beyond description. Over time, people who had lost loved ones would seek Michael out. A firefighter whose child had died tragically, a friend whose parent had passed, people drowning in overwhelming grief. Michael would tell them patiently, "Nobody really dies. We just slip out of the physical body and go home. When I left my body, I was still me, same personality, same thoughts, same everything, just in a different place, a different frequency. So everyone you've lost is still themselves. They're still here, still aware, just at a frequency we can't perceive. You haven't lost them." This message brought profound comfort to many people. Some told Michael with tears in their eyes that his words had saved their lives, that they had been considering suicide, but his testimony gave them hope and strength to carry on. But then came inevitable pushback. After months of sharing his story openly, a co-worker pulled him aside one day. "Hey, Michael," the guy said, looking uncomfortable. "People are starting to talk about you. They're saying you're acting strange. Maybe you should be more careful about who you share this with." Michael thought about others who had similar experiences and faced pressure to stay silent. He realized he was facing the same choice, so Michael made a difficult decision. He stopped talking about it publicly. He kept quiet for 15 long years. He went back to work, continued his career, competed in his races, lived what appeared to be a normal life, but the memory never went away. It was always there, waiting beneath the surface. Then in 2010, Michael retired from the fire department. As soon as he stopped working, the memory came flooding back with overwhelming force. He became consumed with finding answers and deeper understanding. He started researching everything: near-death experiences, consciousness studies, quantum physics, ancient wisdom traditions, spirituality. He discovered that many traditional cultures had profound knowledge about reality and consciousness that modern Western society had largely forgotten, dismissed, or suppressed. But that journey of discovery is another story for another time. What matters most is the core message Michael wanted everyone to know and understand. Death is absolutely not what we've been taught to believe. It's not an ending or a tragedy. It's a beautiful transition, a homecoming, a return to our true nature as eternal beings of consciousness and love. The people we love who have died haven't gone anywhere. They're still here, still themselves, still fully aware and conscious, just existing at a different frequency we can't perceive with physical senses. They're literally right beside us. And one day, when our own time comes to leave these physical bodies, we'll join them joyfully in that magnificent realm of infinite light and boundless love and eternal joy. That's Michael Patterson's heartfelt testimony, and his deepest hope is that by sharing his story, he can bring genuine comfort, lasting peace, and real hope to anyone who needs to hear it.